Coming up with Steve Bowie, and I'm very pleased to present him because I'm a very dedicated follower of his podcast, Ellington Reflections, which he writes, curates, and broadcasts. And if you're on Facebook, you'll no doubt have seen his work. We on the TDES Facebook page, we often make sure you see that. Steve is a clarinetist and mainly saxophonist. He also happens to have just retired from 40 years in the aerospace industry, having received a degree from UCLA in electrical engineering. And while he was at UCLA, he was a teaching assistant for the subject of his topic. He was a teaching assistant for Kenny Burrell, who has been teaching a Duke Ellington class at UCLA very famously. And before I turn the microphone over to Steve, you'll remember him last year from Ellington 2021. And he gave a presentation on Cootie Williams because he is continuing to do the research for a book he plans to write on Cootie, a biography of Cootie Williams. So I'm really, really pleased to turn over the mic to Steve Bowie and his Kenny Burrell presentation.
Thank you very much, Marilyn, for that very nice introduction. And thanks to the Duke Ellington Society, to the board, to Brigitte and Oaf for their technical help. I greatly appreciate it. And let's see if I...
Steve, you should thank your wife for lending you her computer tonight.
Yeah, and I especially need to thank you for taking the time to get me going because I was sweating a little. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Kenny Burrell, like so many of us, has fallen under the spell of Ellingtonia. And I'm going to cover how and when that happened, Kenny's personal and professional connection to Ellingtonia, and what Kenny has done to promote the legacy of Duke Ellington, Billy Strayhorn, their music and musicians. So this is, first of all, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, but I'd like to give a brief introduction to those of you who might not be completely familiar with the great guitarist and educator Kenny Burrell. Kenneth Earl Burrell was born on 31st of July, 1931 in Detroit, Michigan. He initially wanted to be a saxophone player, but family finances wouldn't allow it. So his loss is our gain. He earned a degree in music from Wayne State University in Detroit in 1955, and he's one of the few major jazz artists with a college degree. He made his first recordings in 1951 with Dizzy Gillespie, and he's recorded over 100 albums as a leader and made countless appearances as a sideman on albums by musicians like Jimmy Smith, Billie Holiday, Coleman Hawkins, John Coltrane, and way too many to list. And like the recordings, there's a whole lot of awards he's won, and they're numerous also. But to mention two, in 2005, Burrell was named the Jazz Master by the National Endowment for the Arts and received a Jazz Educator of the Year award from Downbeat magazine. All About Jazz says Kenny Burrell is among the handful of guitar greats who have forever changed the role of their instrument. So sometime in the 60s, Duke Ellington dubbed Kenny Burrell his favorite guitarist. And here's an expression of Kenny's admiration for Duke Ellington as printed in Jazz in Jet magazine. So how did Kenny Burrell become so interested in Duke Ellington? Here's a short video that explains that. In 2008, Kenny Burrell was interviewed by Dan Del Fiorentino for the NAMM Oral History Program. And NAMM is the National Association of Music Merchants. And Mr. Del Fiorentino kindly provided a copy of Kenny's interview for use in this presentation. So this is how Kenny became interested in Duke Ellington.
My interest in Ellington is twofold. One is certainly music, because that's, it's incredible music. probably the largest body of music of the 20th century of any kind of genre, what we call Ellingtonia. And that started when I was a kid. You know, I remember being about 8 or 9, and my brother, I mentioned Billy, he also played a little piano, but the piano was in. I remember there was sheet music of Sophisticated Lady, and that was being played, and we'd hear Ellington on the radio and all that. And then the tunes are so many for jazz musicians to learn, not just jazz musicians, but people in general. So Ellington was both pop and jazz in terms of just listening and hearing this stuff. So it was there. And then when I became a professional musician, I got more serious about really listening to the inside of what's going on, analyzing and figuring out what's really going on in this music, the inside parts and all the harmonies and stuff. And I remember hanging out with one of my other mentors, slightly older than me. He was Thad Jones, the great Thad Jones, trumpet player and arranger. One night I remember just hanging out at his home, and he said, listen, we put some Ellington on, and he said, listen to the trombones. And he was trying to tell me, listen to what they're especially doing in there. And I said, and it just kind of locked me in. And I said, and it's like any great art, the more you listen, the more you hear, or the more you look, the more you see. So I started listening to all of the sections and how they interrelated and all of the different unusual kind of harmonies, which sometimes are on the first listen are not apparent, but they're there. And that's, you know, really interesting, and it shows the depth of his music. So that I continue to absorb and to listen and enjoy and respect, gain and respect all the time, as many other musicians and around the world have, to the point where now he's considered one of, if not the greatest musician of the 20th century, regardless of category.
So Burrell was not only drawn to the music of just the music of Ellington, he also was impressed with his success, his longevity, and how he conducted himself as an African American in America. So personally, I first became aware of Kenny Burrell in 1975 when he released Ellington Is Forever. This is a double LP. And then Volume 2 came out in 1977. And, you know, I'm sure you all are familiar with these albums. They're both double LPs, and there's a host of jazz giants on there, people like Snooky Young, Thad Jones, Jimmy Smith, Jimmy Jones, Ernie Andrews, John Faddis, Quentin Jackson, and more. And All Music goes on to say, this is clearly an affectionate tribute, one born out of close association as well as great appreciation. So in 1977, I started my studies as an engineering major at the University of California at Los Angeles, known as UCLA. At the beginning of 1978, flyers were posted on the kiosks around UCLA announcing this class Ellingtonia. This is one of the flyers here. And one of my friends, Joshua Spiegelman, saw it and gave it to me. They didn't post it in the engineering part of the campus. It was posted where the humanities and arts were. So, you know, that was a little bit foreign for us engineer majors. And anyway, we were both in disbelief. And, you know, an actual class on my hero, Duke Ellington, taught by the Kenny Burrell, you know, that guy. And I'd just like you to read you the description there of the class. It says, Ellington's music, known as Ellingtonia, is recognized as the largest and perhaps most important body of music ever produced in the United States. The course will look at Ellington from several viewpoints, i.e. orchestra leader, pianist, composer, author, arranger, lyricist, philosopher, producer, social commentator, innovator, and Afro-American. The course will cover the many contributions of other artists who work with Ellington, such as composer Billy Strayhorn and musicians Johnny Hodges, Cootie Williams, and Mercer Ellington. Fellow students in that first class, I remember trumpeter Cora Bryant, and another guy stuck out because he knew a lot about Ellington beforehand too, and that's, I think he's on the line here, and that's Stephen Lasker. And the way Kenny structured the class, it was not focused on memorizing a bunch of facts and dates about Duke. I'll get more into that later, but at the completion of that first offering of the class, I got an A, which was a much appreciated addition to my grade point average. As I said earlier, I was an engineering major, and competition for grades in that discipline are like the Hunger Games. But most importantly, at the end, Kenny asked me to be his teaching assistant for future sessions of Ellingtonia. And of course, I said yes. And I'd like to say that it was the best job I ever had in my life. You get to hear about Duke Ellington, play Duke Ellington records, and hang out with Kenny Burrell. What's not to like? So this class was so far ahead of its time that there was almost no available literature. There were 3 books required for the class. First one is a Barry Ucla biography. This was from 1946. And then the Peter Gammon biography, which was from 1958. And this is my well-worn copy of Music is My Mistress. And just so you know, the first 2 books were special orders. And in 1978, they cost $17.50, which is 76 bucks in today's dollars. I wasn't able to obtain a syllabus for the more recent classes, so I could tell you what has changed and what's different, but I'll give you my perspective from what I know. So the first session of each quarter's class started with a personal memory. Kenny told us about the last time he saw Duke. They were both working in Chicago at the end of October 1973. Here's the page from the newspaper, and you can see that Ellington was at Mr. Kelly's and Burrell was at the London House. And after work, Ellington invited Burrell up to his hotel room and played him bits of something he was working on and asking his opinion, and you know, just a musical interchange. And that piece, or those pieces, happened to be Duke Ellington's 3rd Sacred Concert, which was recorded on October 24th, 1973, just a few days after the Chicago get-together. And Ellington would pass away exactly 7 months after this recording was made. So here's just a few pictures I'd share that I took over the years with Kenny. This is back towards the beginning of the class. This is him in front of his office there in Campbell Hall. And this is somebody who often sat in on the class. He was another UCLA professor, but his name was Paul Bullock. And Paul was one of the biggest jazz fans I ever met in my life. And it was rare to go to a concert or a club here in Los Angeles and not see him there. So this is Kenny in class. As I said earlier, Kenny wasn't into regurgitating factoids and dates. He gave his midterm and final exams as take-home essays. You can partially see the questions in the background there. That's my writing, and I'll say more about this picture later. So this is in 2013. It's a little blurry because I didn't want to use my flash. And he's answering some questions from some students. So we had some pretty distinguished guest lecturers too, and I wish that these had been preserved and recorded for posterity, but unfortunately, you know, the technology is a lot easier to do today than it was back in the last century. So one frequent guest was Patricia Willard, who you all well know, writer, historian, publicist for Duke Ellington. Leonard Feather, who was the jazz critic for the Los Angeles Times at the time. He started working with Ellington in the 30s. Jimmy Jones, pianist and arranger, and one of the things I remember Jimmy telling the class was he made arrangements for Ella Fitzgerald to sing with the band, and he told her not to use them with any other band because they wouldn't sound right. And there was Harold Bob Ucla, one of Duke's personal friends, and he was always at the last session of the class, and he'd bring his 16 millimeter personal copy of the 1973 television special, Duke Ellington, We Love You Madly. And in those days, that was the only way to see it. There was no reruns or video on demand or YouTube, but there is a poor quality version of it now on YouTube. And as a side note, I happened to come across this. The Ucla memorialized, Bob and his wife memorialized their devotion to Ellingtonia for eternity. She's a satin doll and he's just a lucky so-and-so. So speaking of the Ellington We Love You Madly special, it comes up in this NAMM video. The occasion is Kenny is asked if he ever worked with Duke Ellington.
I performed with him directly only once. That was on a TV show called Love You Madly. It was a tribute to Duke Ellington in 1973, toward the end of 1973. It was produced by Bud Yorkin and Quincy Jones. It was a television show, and I was able to be in the band and playing along with Ellington, backing him up. I had another opportunity, which I unfortunately couldn't make. He was doing a show called My People in Chicago, in which I was asked to join that band to make the recording and do that. But I was in New York busy with other studio work, and I couldn't get away to do that because I had a commitment, and that's kind of how I am. You know, if I make a commitment, I try to keep it. But he understood that. We became friends. And I did work with him kind of indirectly because I recorded with a few of his musicians, such as Johnny Hodges and Paul Gonzalez. And sometimes he would come in the studio and bring music or just observe. So that way I worked not directly with him, but the one time I actually played with him was on that show.
So unfortunately, it's not very clear, but here's a screenshot from that television show. So you can see Duke there, Kenny there. There's Quincy Jones, Jerome Richardson, Bill Green, Marshall Royal. So, you know, a bunch of heavy hitters there. So he's worked with a bunch of the Ellingtonians over the years. This is from 1962, and this was in New Jersey. But here's a montage of some of Kenny's Ellingtonia credits. And what you'll hear in the background is a soundtrack is Johnny Hodges and Kenny Burrell on I Let a Song Go Out of My Heart. So in 1996, Kenny Burrell was named director of the UCLA Jazz Studies program, which he founded. And this is his business card. As you can, the class Ellingtonia is one of the required courses for the degree in jazz studies. Just as a side note here, you can see that the music department is housed in Schoenberg Hall. This is Schoenberg Hall, and it was named for Arnold Schoenberg, the composer, who taught at UCLA from 36 to 44. And the reason I bring this up is, despite being named for one of the most daring composers of the early 20th century, at the time I was at UCLA, the music department was very conservative. It took 10 years for the Ellingtonia class to be co-listed with the music department. This is another program Kenny instituted at UCLA. This is UCLA's Ellingtonia Jazz Band. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a good quality video, but here's a screenshot of Kenny leading them in a performance. And he brought a lot of concert performances to UCLA, usually celebrating Ellington. These are some Polaroids I took from 1979 outdoor free concert. And you can see Kenny there, and there's Teddy Edwards on tenor sax. And the, let's see, I thought I had Ernie Andrews. Yeah, there's Ernie Andrews singing, recently departed Ernie Andrews. So he brought a lot to the campus. He also instituted a series of annual Ellington tributes. And as you can see, they were usually around Ellington's birthday. There were people like Stevie Wonder, Al Hibbler, Bill Berry Big Band who presented at these concerts. This is my program, and I happened to look behind me, and Benny Carter was sitting behind me, so I asked him for his autograph. This is one from 1982, and you can see the roster there. Pretty impressive set. Unfortunately, except for Kenny Burrell, I think everyone has left us. But you'll notice that Don Cherry, Charlie Hayden, and Billy Higgins were participants, and that's 3/4 of the original Ornette-Coleman quartet. Here's another one from 2009. Herb Jeffries, Gerald Wilson, Ernie Andrews, Dee Dee Bridgewater. He was able to get an array of talent and cover an array of themes. A very special concert was held on the evening of April 29th, 1999, which was the 100th anniversary of Duke Ellington's birth. And there were people like Milt Jackson, Ray Brown, Herbie Hancock, and 2 Ellington alumni, Bill Berry and Louis Bellson. Earlier that same day, there was an unveiling of a statue by sculptor Robert Graham. And this statue is outside of Schoenberg Hall. And you'll recognize that it looks a lot like the one in New York City. Well, it's the same sculptor. And this one's about 1/3 the size. And Kenny was able to, anytime he had the opportunity, he'd work in Ellingtonia. On this 1993 St. Patrick's Day episode of The Tonight Show, Kenny plays a few bars of Duke Ellington's main stem and promotes one of his Ellington-themed CDs. So in this case, this is where I have to play the backup.
A fine, fine Irishman sitting in, came all the way from Ireland?
Yeah, great Irishman. I like my suit, man.
Oh, that's nice.
Sitting in with us, a very, very fine Irishman. He's been an inspiration to musicians all over the world. Please welcome the great Mr. Kenny Burrell.
Well, it's been as fine a St. Patrick's Day as I could remember. I want to thank Kenny Burrell for sitting with the band. This is a new CD called Ellington a la carte. Thank you, Kenny. Thank you very, very much.
We go back to this picture. This is Kenny back in the late 70s with two gentlemen I'm still friends with. Sobering to think that we were teens at the time. Now we're in our 60s. Both of them are educators. On the right here is Lawrence McFalls. He's a semi-retired political science professor at McGill University in Montreal. Randy Porter here in the center teaches music in the Oakland, California public schools. Both supplied me with a copy of Kenny's speech at the '93 Ellington conference, and Kenny said, "A good teacher explains, a great teacher demonstrates, the best teacher inspires." He also goes on to say that Ellington is the teacher, I am the messenger. And at the same conference, Patricia Woolard called Ellington the ultimate educator. Well, Randy told me recently that thanks to Kenny Burrell, I can say that thousands of Oakland school kids now know about Ellington as a result of his inspiration. So through Ellington, through Kenny, the Ellington message goes on. This short little video is from one of the UCLA professors, Dr. Alessandro Durante. And Dr. Durante and Kenny taught a class at UCLA called The Culture of Jazz Aesthetics. And it looks at the aesthetics of jazz from the point of view of the musician and from the musicians who shaped jazz as an art form in the 20th century. So the sentiments he expresses on this short little clip are an outgrowth of what he learned from Ellington's music, and he voiced the same thought in the NAMM video. And he also plays a few seconds of Billy Strayhorn's Lotus Blossom.
The great art is this: the more you look, the more you see. The more you listen, the more you hear. And it becomes more important.
So there's a beautiful composition by Kenny Burrell called Be Yourself. It was inspired by Duke Ellington's advice. It's something that Duke would often offer. I found an interview where drummer Steve Little asked Duke when he joined the band for playing suggestions. What should I play? Ellington told him, "I don't want you to play like Sonny Greer or Sam Woodyard. Do your thing." So from that type of inspiration that Kenny also provided, one of the students wrote this: "I play the guitar, and the music I've created these past few weeks have been above and beyond anything I thought I could come up with by myself. In fact, I remember specifically the day and moment in class when Professor Burrell played Be Yourself. The room was filled with such presence that I couldn't do anything but sit there and fall into the music. And I saw Professor Burrell playing himself so masterfully on the guitar. I wasn't analyzing how complex the stuff was that he was playing or comparing myself to him. I just took what I heard as being a product of the soul of the musician playing. It just made so much sense." The musician goes on to say that they had an epiphany, an awakening, and then they were able to free themselves. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to find a picture of Kenny and Duke together, so this will have to do. And this presentation was just a small portion of the intersectionality between Kenny Burrell and Duke Ellington. I'd like to summarize by repeating Kenny's words. A good teacher explains, a great teacher demonstrates, and the best teacher inspires. Ellington is the teacher, I am the messenger. Duke Ellington and Kenny Burrell inspire students, both inside and outside of the classroom environment, all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Everybody, big round of applause for Steve, please.
Yeah, wonderful.
Excellent.
Thank you.